the chair of the advisory board for the Organization of Iranian American Communities, Ramesh Sepehrrad. Ramesh, it's been really great to see you since we met personally at the Capitol. We've heard from a lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill with not just their condemnation for what's happening with Iran and the crackdown that we're seeing from the regime, but the action that they're trying to take, again, to put pressure on the regime to stop, again, their crackdown on these protests. Can you lay out for us what's the situation on the ground right now?
Sure. First of all, it's good to be with you. And you're absolutely right. The Iran's protest has a very strong bipartisan support in U.S. House and Senate. And what's happening right now on the ground in Iran is the protests have continued despite the brutal repression, despite the brutal crackdown, including executions of the protesters and including the tremendous number of people who have been arrested. More than 30,000 people have been arrested, and many of them are under torture as we speak. In fact, just 2 days ago, we had a news about one of the political prisoners who has been on hunger strike, Farhad Misami, that we're calling on the international community, especially the United Nations, to send an investigative team into Iran and visit the prisons and really provide a very transparent report on what's happening to these protesters and political prisoners in Iran. So the Iranian people are not backing down. The Iranian people continue to drive their message for the change of this regime and replacing this regime with a secular republic and a democratic governance. And that's what the people of Iran want. And this is what the U.S. Congress stands with the people of Iran. So despite any maneuvering around the issue of JCPOA or issue of the nuclear weapons program, I think the real story is the battle between the Iranian people, their drive for democracy, and the regime in power.
It's a very interesting point. Let's get to this, though. Earlier this week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. They reaffirmed their commitment in countering Iran. They agreed Tehran should not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. What do you make of all of this?
You know, as I said, I think the real battle is what's happening on the ground between the protesters and the Iranian regime. Many people are even saying, oh, look, the protests are dying down. Oh, look, the protests are leaderless. I think the fact of the matter is, first of all, the protests are not dying down. They're evolving in their forms. And if you are not hearing it in the news and in the media, it's because the international community is not doing their part. The international community, the Europeans, should have and should be designating the IRGC, which is the main engine that is killing the Iranian people, harassing the protesters, their families. They should be designated as a terrorist group because that's what they are. The Iran's embassy across the world should be shut down. Europeans should be recalling the ambassadors and cutting off all the diplomatic relations with the Iranian regime. So I think this is the real story. And then to the point around, oh, the protests are leaderless. The fact is we are in the 5th month of this protest. How could these protests be leaderless when they're still going on? And one thing I should really add is we're not just seeing the protests in the streets. Just yesterday, for example, in the city of Sanandaj, which is in the northwest of Iran, and the city of Zahedan, which is in the southeast of Iran, all corners of Iran are rising up. In the city of Avandan, over the last 4 days, there's been a major clashes between the protesters and the Iran's security forces. This is the reality. This is the dynamics on the ground that the regime is the most fearful of. So I think the international community has a very clear agenda that they can execute on, which is to cut off their diplomatic relations with Iran, walk away from any more hope or any more talks of the JCPOA, because that deal is dead. The real negotiation should be with the protesters in the streets of Iran who want to change this regime and bring about a secular, democratic, and Iranian republic in replacing
Ramesh,
of this theocracy.
You've really carefully laid out your argument very well, including the pressure that you would like to see the international community putting on the regime to exact change. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Iranians need to do for their movement to be successful. We've obviously seen, I mean, and are we calling this a revolution at some point? We've certainly learned lessons from the protests when it came to the Arab Spring, when countries tried and failed in many of those aspects. What does this need in order to be successful?
You're absolutely right. And this is the key point. It is, in fact, a revolution. The slogans that are coming from inside Iran, it says, don't call it a protest. This is the revolution. I think the Iranian people, what they want is they want their message to be heard loud and clear across the globe. And that is, when you look at the slogans and the chants of the protests in the last 5 months, it began with a death to the dictators, death to Khamenei, which essentially is the rejection of this regime in its entirety. And it also builds upon the previous waves of protests that said, reformers, hardliners, the game is over. So it really closes that gap for anyone who hopes that there's a reformer in Iran that they can negotiate with. But I think in the recent weeks, what we also see coming from inside Iran is the protesters are saying, down with the despots, down with the dictators, be it the Shah or the mullahs. And their message in that slogan is, do not look to the past of the monarchy of the Pahlavis regime and think we are going back to that. Think about the future and the path forward, which is, as I said, is a secular republic Iran that the people of Iran are driving for.
We're going to continue to follow that on this program. Ramesh Sepehrrad, we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to